Joining me now is the Shadow Environment Secretary, Labour MP, Luke Pollard. Welcome to you indeed. Just on this Sky plan to go net zero by 2030, what do you think?
It's a really good piece of leadership, actually. We need more companies, especially those with really big public followings, to lead by example. 2030 is the date that we need all our big public companies to be targeting for net zero. And then we need that pressure to be applied to government, because government wants net zero by 2050, which is 20 years after. And if you look at all the councils that are declaring climate emergencies, they're declaring net zero by 2030, including in the very councils that are represented by Conservative cabinet ministers. So if big companies like Sky, if local councils can be net zero by 2030, why is the government so lacking ambition? Why are they pushing it 2 decades further?
Could the government itself, in terms of its procurement, say we're going to go net zero by 2030?
Oh, it really could do. Government procurement is a mess anyway, and we've got real problems with the way that it's run. It's inefficient, and it doesn't deliver the kind of public goods that we really need. There's a moment for leadership here, and that's why whether you're a council leader, whether you're a chief exec of a big FTSE 100 or run your own small business, there's a thing that you can do, whether big or small, because if we're going to hit net zero by 2030, 2050, or as we're currently in train for 2099, which is where we are currently, we're all going to be required to do something and to have that build up over time. So there's absolutely things government could do, whether that's just about its fleet, whether it's about the buildings it operates, whether it's about the policies it implements. There's lots that can be done.
And what is Labour's current policy?
Well, I want to see a net zero by 2030. To achieve that, there'll be some sectors that will lag just ever so slightly behind. Agriculture is a good example of that, because it's really hard to decarbonise agriculture by 2030. So that means some sectors will need to decarbonise sooner to create the carbon headroom that we need to hit net zero by 2030. But let's be honest about this. There's no choice about doing this. The climate emergency is real. It is pressing. It's causing catastrophic change around the world. We only need to look at the wildfires in Australia, but also the risk of biodiversity loss in our own country, to realise that we're having this profound effect on the environment, and there's things that we need to be doing about it, not just pushing that far down the distance, but doing now.
Do you welcome the government's decision to bring down the deadline for getting rid of petrol and diesel cars by 5 years to 2035?
Well, 2035 is an improvement. I would prefer it to be in the early 2030s, but this is something that Labour MPs, and to be fair, even some Conservatives, have been calling for quite some time. Putting a date on when you're stopping selling diesel and petrol cars is one thing. Putting a separate date on when they're stopping the use of those is a very different thing, and that's where we need to have both those together. Now, you can only really phase out diesel and petrol cars once you've got a replacement in store. So if you remember what Ken Livingstone did when he introduced the congestion charge in London, the extra buses came in on the same day as the congestion charge. And what we've got here is this is sometimes a victory of sound bites over detail. Bringing forward the date where diesel and petrol engines are not going to be sold is a good thing, but we need to make sure the alternatives are there, and in particular, that those alternatives are available to people on low incomes, because it's all well and good for the affluent to be able to decarbonise, but actually we need every single person in our country to do that.
Is this an area for party political conflict, or are we all basically moving in the same direction?
I think there is a general direction that all political parties recognise that the climate emergency is real. I think where there's a difference is at what pace and with what response should we implement any of those policies. Now, pushing net zero, and with it the really big transformative change far down into the distance to 2050, as the government's doing, gives them lots of time to not do it effectively. That's a lot of general elections away, 2050, but we don't have that luxury to do that. The climate emergency is real. That's why, whether you are a Labour MP or a Tory MP, I think there is a real pressure that we need to be exerting on everyone in positions of authority to be taking the climate emergency more seriously and having bolder and swifter plans to react on it. But we have to take people with us. And that's where actually having politicians shout at each other about these far off dates, well, it's a bit confusing. Let's have real action that people can get behind.
OK, Mr Pollard, thank you very much indeed. Now, not quite sure what's happening with Boris Johnson's speech on this he's delivering today. It's not going to be live anymore. We will bring you latest reports on that here on Sky News, and stay with All That Politics. Lots in the next hour.